Here's what's coming up on episode 33 of the Big Séance podcast. Karen Burton.
But the final question is always going to be, what does this image, this symbol, this color, this person mean to you?
Do you ever have dreams where you're reading in your dreams? And what's that mean?
Well, I do. And then I had that lucid moment where I realized that he had died. And I looked at him in my dream and said, oh, you're dead. You wake up and you have an overwhelming emotional sense that that person has been with you. I firmly believe that they wait on that other side of the veil for opportunities to step in and help us. Then I ran back to my children and I explained to my oldest, I'm going to stay here with your two younger brothers. I need you to hold on to this post as if your very life depended on it. I am not strong enough to hold all three of you.
Wow, and those are very kind of poetic. Some of my earliest dreams that I remember are just dreams about, like, Freddy Krueger.
There you go. You know, I dreamed about pancakes. What does that
mean? Welcome to the Big Séance podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the seance. Before we get to our interview today with Karen Burton, I want to give a few thank yous and shout outs. I want to thank Lana and John from the blog Carbon Lilies, as well as Heather Lynn. They've been communicating on Facebook and Twitter, which is always very fun, and they've been sharing episodes of the podcast, so thank you. Candy Burke and Diane Goff have been doing a lot of retweeting too. Randall Keller of the Voices podcast, who is a friend, long-lost cousin, and former guest of the Big Séance podcast. He's always tweeting about and mentioning the Big Séance podcast, so thank you, Randy. Thanks goes out to D. Omrin for tweeting very nice things about Big Séance. And finally, I heard this week from Sherry Abbott, or Sherry Abate. I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name. On Facebook, and she talked about having a clock radio, just like the radio some of you might recall me blogging about quite a bit when I was doing some radio sweep experimenting, and she asked if I had ever discovered the Channeling Eric website, and most of you here probably know that yes, I have, and if you haven't, it's a fascinating story and site, and the book is great too, so thank you for reaching out, Sherry, and thank you to all the other names that I just mentioned. It really helps kind of get communication out about Big Séance podcast, plus it's fun to reach out to folks. So now, let's talk to Karen Burton. So as a teacher, one thing that I learned a long time ago is to never be surprised about the people and connections you make at parent-teacher conferences. They really are amazing experiences. Two of my previous guests, Marilyn Painter and Victoria Cosner Love, have been people I've developed interesting and nerdy paranormal friendships with, and I met them at parent-teacher conferences. Today, I'm adding a third guest to that list. Her name is Karen Burton. She is an intuitive mentor and dream interpreter. Now, I've yet to do an episode on dreams, and though I don't write a ton of posts about dreams at BigSeance.com, some of the dreams that I have written about have been some of my more popular posts. So I think it's time for the dream episode to happen. What do you think, Karen? Welcome.
Oh, absolutely. I'm delighted to be here.
Cool. I'm glad to have you here, too. It'll be kind of like a parent-teacher conference, except not.
Except we don't have to talk about my kid.
Yeah, and a little nerdier, maybe.
A little nerdier.
So, tell us about your background and maybe go into what started your interest in dreams.
Well, since childhood, I've had extraordinary dreams, remembered many dreams per evening, and people have always asked me, what do you think this means? And I've kind of had an intuition about that. As I traveled through my teen years, my dreams got more vivid, a little scarier to me sometimes. And then as I became a young adult, I began to use them as guides in my own life. I studied psychology as an undergraduate and studied religion as a graduate student. So I gained a lot of understanding about symbols and symbolic kind of communication. And that really helped me in that area. And since then, as I've stepped more into my intuitive side and developed gifts in some other areas like reading the tarot or working with people trying to understand what signs or symbols are coming their way, I continue to work with their dreams. And it's fascinating to me, and I never get tired of it.
So when did you talked about some of those dreams you had when you were younger and even the scarier ones. At what point do you start thinking about interpreting them? Did you start that at a young age too?
Well, I had a dream when I was a little girl that quote unquote came true. I dreamed about a car and a hill, and it was very frightening to me. And I remember my mother explaining to me it was just a dream. And then a couple weeks later, I was in a car and my brother climbed over the back seat and released the emergency brake. And that car traveled down a hill and hit a tree and turned over. So I knew from a very young age, I must have been about 5 when this happened, that my dreams were not to be messed with, in spite of what my mother said. But I probably didn't start interpreting them until I started sharing them in my teenage years, when I would have dreams about whole forests with candles on the tops of trees and celestial beings coming down ladders and things like that. You know, as a 15, 16-year-old, I just thought I was going to die. I didn't really have any framework for dealing with some of the symbols I was seeing.
Wow, and those are very kind of poetic. Some of my earliest dreams that I remember are just dreams about like Freddy Krueger.
There you go. Yeah.
Very different experience.
Very different.
I also don't tend to remember I know people have tons of dreams every night, but I don't tend to remember them well. But when I do, it's just like, it's like a massive, thing where you think about it all day long. And those are the ones I blog about. Right.
And you can actually improve your memory of your dreams if you practice. Mm-hmm. But all of us dream in these wonderful languages of symbols. And it's just fun for me to help people write their own symbol dictionaries. They're always asking me, do I need a dream dictionary? Do I need to buy one? It's like, probably not. You communicate to yourself with your own symbols. So inevitably, when someone starts talking to me about their dream, they have the key to understanding it, not me.
Mm-hmm. So what are your opinion about a lot of the dream dictionaries or books that talk about the symbols and things? I'm sure you have several of those, right?
Oh, yes, I have several, and I use them often. I think people who really want to work on the language of their dreams and to understand and interpret their dreams should search out and find a good one. But with the internet these days, you can look up what 20 different people think about a particular symbol.
Right.
But the final question is always going to be, what does this image, this symbol, this color, this person mean to you? That is always going to be the most important question. And to answer that, you don't really need a book.
And I never really, until now, thought about how that relates to probably your work with the tarot too, right?
Exactly.
It's all about interpreting the symbols and...
Right. And that I'm not one of those people who... Do you remember Miss Chloe? Her commercials on...
Oh, yeah, uh-huh.
And she would say, the woman would call and say, who's my baby's daddy? And she would say, you know who your daddy's baby is. She was so all interested in proving how psychic she was. Mm-hmm. That's so not who I am. I really want people to be able to develop their own intuition and to be able to interpret their own experiences. and to be affirmed and validated in using their intuition every day. So I'm so not interested in that. It's like I'm not afraid to ask people questions like, if they have a dream about water, I want to ask them if their experiences with water are pleasant or frightening. Like, did you almost drown as a child? That's important.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, I don't get TV commercials, but I do get a lot of people coming back to me over and over again.
So one of the, you're talking about symbols, one of the most popular posts that I have at bigseance.com is a post about being able to read in your dreams. I had a very vivid dream where I woke myself up because I was so impressed that I could read a storefront sign that was on a building in my dream. And the sign was this really pretty shade of blue, and it had one word on it, and it was the word velvet. And at that point, I don't even remember what the velvet was about or what the dream was about, but I was so impressed that I read it in my dream that I instantly woke up. Do you ever have dreams where you're reading in your dreams? And what's that mean?
Well, I do, but I remember a lot of my dreams and journal a lot of them because I've had dreams that I felt were messages or communications from the other side, which I know we're going to get to.
Mm-hmm.
I try to keep track of them. I think we don't need to read in our dreams, so we usually don't. The language of dreaming is symbols, so we don't need letters, but when people do remember them, I always encourage them to write them down. The same is true with numbers, actual numbers, like seeing a street sign with a number on it. And my advice is usually pretty simple. It's like, start looking. Look for that word, look for that number, pay attention because your subconscious and or the other side has told you to be on the lookout for that. So most people are able to know when it enters into their waking world. They're like, oh, yeah, that's right. I dreamed that, or I saw that, or that number is important. And it's able to give them, a small guidance or information that they wouldn't have had otherwise.
And I think I've heard some people say that if you, and I could be wrong, I'm trying to remember this, if you do end up reading in your dream and you're consciously, realizing you're reading, that maybe that's a sign of being lucid and being in a lucid situation. Any
time that you're aware that you're dreaming while you're dreaming is considered a lucid dream.
Oh, okay.
And those dreams are an opportunity for us to steer a little bit. If we're aware that we're dreaming and we can keep from waking up, which actually improves with practice, then we can ask ourselves or our visitors questions in the dream itself. But unfortunately, most of the time when we become aware that we're dreaming, that's usually the trigger that wakes us up.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a wonderful tool for tapping into a kind of guidance that you can't get from a book.
Right. Let's get into this whole, I'm sure most of the listeners this is what they're going to be excited about too, is talking about getting visits from loved ones in dreams. And I know you have apparently a cool story about your dad the night before 9/11. So I'd love to hear about that.
Well, my father died Memorial Day weekend of 2001, and we were experiencing some difficulty with extended family members over his will and last testament. And it had been requested of us that we sign off on the will without seeing it. And I was very upset about this. And as is often the case when we lose a loved one, there were mixed feelings of regret and, relationships that are a little unresolved. And I didn't really know what to do about this request to sign off on this will of his that I'd never seen, by the way. And then one night I dreamed that he stepped into the bedroom where I currently live. And he walked and he sat on the bed right by me and patted me on the leg, which was a very familiar gesture of his. Mm-hmm. And I was so delighted to see him. I said, "Oh, Dad, I'm so glad you're here. I just need to know what to do about this will. I don't know what to do." And he said, "You do whatever you want. Do what makes you happy." And I'm like, no, you don't understand. this lawyer's calling me and we have all this stuff going on and I don't know what to do. And he just was very persistent and very gentle and kept saying, do what makes you happy. Just do what makes you happy. I'm like, and my personality started shining through. I'm like, that's not helpful. Because I wanted him to tell me what to do. And he repeatedly did not. And then I had that lucid moment where I realized that he had died. And I looked at him in my dream and said, oh, you're dead. I don't suppose we have a lot of tact in our dreams either. But he smiled at me and patted me. And I remember, because this wasn't the first lucid dream I'd ever had, really fighting at this point to stay in the dream. Because I knew I really wanted to ask him this question, what do I do about this will? I really wanted to know that. And struggling to not rise up to a physical reality, but to stay in the dream with him. And at that point, he reached out in the dream and grabbed both of my hands. And I remember this very clearly because the feeling was so vivid. Like I could identify the feel of his hands. And if you are having that kind of a dream of a visit, almost always that sort of thing will happen where there'll be something about the loved one who comes to see you that will be absolutely identifiable. The sound of their voice or the feel of their touch or the emotion that you feel when they're there that makes you absolutely certain that this is the person or the spirit who's with you. And he grabbed my hands and I just knew it was him. And he said, you don't need to be thinking about this will. I need you to focus. I said, on what? He said, something is going to be asked of you and it needs all of your attention. All of your attention. And I'm like, okay, what? And he said, you need to pay attention. And he just kind of kept saying that. I kept remembering when I think of the dream, just the word attention, 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 attention. And I woke up. Mm-hmm. And I was very disappointed. One, because he didn't tell me what to do about the will. And also because, I thought I'd missed this opportunity to talk with him. He died suddenly. He was only 62 and there was no saying goodbye or anything like that. So I felt like I'd missed out. Well, that morning was 9/11 and I forgot completely and totally about the dream, like the rest of us who were transfixed on the television with those horrific images and just the sadness and the horror of what we were seeing. And about 3 days after 9/11, I got a call from a person serving as the pastor of the worship service where I worked as a worship leader. And he said to me, I have been led by Spirit to ask you to give the message this Sunday. He said, I am just certain that you are the one that needs to talk to us about what we need to do about this event spiritually. Are you willing to do that? And that's when I remembered my dad.
Wow.
And I was like, holy cow. And when I said yes, by the way, and I did that. And the whole concern with the will and his property and all that fell away from me like paper confetti. I just ceased to care about that at all. I focused my attention on trying to bring words of hope and peace to myself and to the people who were going to be with me on Sunday morning. And I did that, and I repeatedly thanked my father for the heads up. And on Monday, after that Sunday, I signed away the will. I could have cared less about that. From that moment on, I realized how unimportant and insignificant it really was.
Now, that's a huge validating moment that I think probably a lot of us aren't lucky enough to get.
Right.
Because I think probably the biggest question that people probably have with these spirit visitation dreams is kind of the doubt of, well, how do I know it really was them? What are some other ways that we have to kind of validate that we really did get communication from our loved one?
Well, first of all, it's the way that is the easiest for them to communicate. We need to understand that when we're sleeping, we kind of travel closer to that veil between planes, between existence. And we are not putting up all of our fences and defenses when we're sleeping. And so it's much easier for our loved ones to communicate with us when we're dreaming than when we're awake.
Mm-hmm.
So many more people report communication with their lost loved ones when they're sleeping than, say, smelling their perfume or hearing their voice or something like that, which does happen. But almost always when people report that this happens to them, and when it has happened to me, these dreams are more vivid. They are profoundly experiential. You remember what it felt like, what it looked like, what it smelled like. You wake up and you have an overwhelming emotional sense that that person has been with you. I've never had a visit that was frightening or disconcerting. Every time I've experienced a loved one of mine who's come through in a dream, I have always felt their presence as a loving, warmth, security, telling me that I'm not doing this by myself. And so I try to tell people, if you had some kind of nightmare, just call that a nightmare. I really can't believe that our loved ones are going to do the work that it takes to cross that barrier to be with us, to scare us. They come to be with us out of the love they have for us. So that would be the first thing that I tell people, to look for a vivid experiential that carries over into the daylight. And also ask yourself, if this person could only say one thing to me, what would they say? 9 times out of 10, it's going to be, I love you. So did the dream say that? Did it say, I love you, I support you, I'm here for you?
I have 2 dreams really that stick out that I'm pretty confident in my, heart were spirit visitation dreams. And the first one, and it's not something that I came away with a message, but I kind of just realized that, my subconscious probably got the message. And I think that's probably how it works for some of us.
Right.
But the signal that I got was, I have a great grandmother that died when I was really young. And so I don't have a lot of memories from her, but I remember her living room and a chair in the corner of the living room. And for some reason, that corner of her living room stuck out. And my dream was her, just kind of like it was a movie, just focused on her sitting in that chair and a light around her, like a glow around her. And I was like, well, that's kind of my signal that was a real thing. Right. And I don't know what the message was, but I'm sure I got it at some point.
Right. Well, John Edward, who of course is the expert at being a medium, often says that it's enough validation to just know they're here.
Yeah.
And when people tell me they've had a visit and they try to defend it to me, I always smile and say, see, you already know it was a visit. You want me to tell you, yes, it was, but you already know that. See, Patrick, you already know that that was a visit. So we have to trust our instincts about that. And if we're sitting back and going, when we first wake up, then, be skeptical. But in those moments, in those first moments after a dream, we kind of know. And we need to trust our own knowing. And that's how intuition works. Unfortunately, it's not like a scientific experiment. We can't prove it by putting chemicals in a test tube. But yet, it is a truth, and it's been a truth for a very long time. And human beings received that as truth for a long time before science came along in its current form. We're like one of the first generations to dismiss that. People who received dreams and visits from the dead were revered in cultures for thousands of years. It's just now that we kind of look at them like they're a little silly.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on inviting loved ones into your dreams?
Well, I think that's not only possible, I think it's a really good idea. I don't have a guide that tells me how the afterlife works, but I do know, I'm going to tell you about another dream, if that's all right.
Yeah, go ahead.
I dreamed that I was walking down a highway, and the highway was perfectly smooth asphalt, a perfectly flat, think about driving through Kansas. Remember how flat Kansas is? It's like driving through Kansas. And I was walking on this highway, and it was perfectly smooth. And I knew my father was behind me. And I knew he was there, but I didn't turn around. And I could hear his footsteps behind me. And I walked for a while. And then I turned around and saw him. And in my dream, he was very young and handsome. Probably not like I had seen him since I was an infant, but I knew it was him. He was vibrant and vital. And that in and of itself, first of all, was a beautiful visitation because it spoke to me of his wellness on the other side. But I walked backward. I turned around on the highway. I walked to him. I said, "What are you doing? Follow me?" And at this point, I was lucid. I knew I was dreaming, but this was not his first or second visit. So I was determined to stay there. And he said, "I've come to tell you how hard it is for us to break through to you. We really need you to help us." And I'm like, "How can we do that?" And he held his hands out, but not towards me. And I reached my hands over and put my hands on him. And when I did, I felt the veil split. And I can't really describe that in waking language, but it did teach me that we need to be open to that and not afraid. I don't think we want to go to bed at night and say, "Okay, anybody who has anything out there they want to say, come on in." It's not that. But the people who have loved us and moved on, if we capture their image in our minds as we're going to sleep, if we think of our fond memories of them, if we ask them to send us wisdom, even if we don't experience a visit from them, I think it's very likely that our dreams will point us in a good direction. And that I firmly believe that they wait on that other side of the veil for opportunities to step in and help us. And that we can learn through our dreaming to be more open to them and invite them in and listen to what they have to say.
I've read in a couple of books about the concept of like a dream space, or what I think someone has referred to as a dream haven. I think it's Michelle Belanger in her book, I think Psychic Dreamwalking or something. And she talks about a dream space. Do you have a dream space where you can, meet people in your dreams?
I do. I think most people have what I would call dreamscapes, like settings that you visit often in your dreams. Like I dream a lot about my grandmother's home. And when I'm walking around in her home, the home of when I was a child, the home looks like it did when I was a child. And sometimes when I'm in that dreamscape, she visits. That is not always the case. Lots of times I dream about cousins and aunts and uncles and other things when I'm there. But I think that calling to mind places and people that connect us to our loved ones, help us create these, I like to think of them like a theater set. Like, when you're doing a play, you build a set of a particular room or a particular place, and our dreams will go back and back and back to familiar settings. And as soon as we begin to understand what those settings mean, then it makes it easier for our loved ones to break through and communicate with us.
In my dreamscape is a room with like a chair and a lot of books.
There you go.
And a fireplace. Is
it an actual memory or is it one you've created?
Well, it's one I created actually in reading that book, Psychic Dreamwalking, I think, by Michelle Belanger. And I decided to, create a space. And it was, here we go again. You have all these poetic dreams. And while reading that book, I actually did have a dream around that time where Lady Gaga
oh, that's great.
came over to my house and said, "Hey, let's go take a walk." And we walked around my neighborhood. And again, I have no clue what we talked about, but that's where my dreams go, that kind of thing. But yours are beautiful.
Lady Gaga. Well, I'm also a writer who works in images, but you have to understand, I've been recounting 3 to 4 dreams a night since I was a young child.
Wow.
So I don't tell you about the dreams I have where I'm standing at the stove and the pot falls over and I'm cleaning up macaroni off the floor. I have those dreams too. Everybody does. As a matter of fact, if you have multiple dreams, there's kind of a rule of thumb about that. The dreams you have earlier in the night tend to be dreams where you process your day, your life. They're the dreams where you're driving in your car, you're buying groceries and you can't find the cauliflower. You're at work you're a teacher, right? So you're at work and you're trying to teach students and you can't get them to be quiet and listen to you. You know, those kind of dreams happen early in the evening. And the more sleep cycles you actually go through, the deeper and deeper your sleep becomes, and the more likely you are to have a dream of subconscious significance or a dream of what I call other significance, where somebody visits or a message actually just breaks through from what the PNN, the Psychic News Network, because I've had those kind of dreams too, but those rarely happen when we first go to sleep. So if you wake up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning with a vivid dream right in front of you, the odds of that being significant are higher than if it wakes you up at 11 or 12.
Sometimes I feel like I remember my dreams more on the weekends too, when I sleep longer. I guess it's usually when I sleep either not long enough, like those nights where you get 4 or 5 hours of sleep, right, or the weekend when you get to, I don't have kids, so, you know, I get to sleep in on the weekends. So I always thought it was strange that that's when I tend to remember my dreams.
I think it's more about which cycle of sleep you're in when you wake up.
Yeah.
And if you have a job where you have to be there at a certain time of day, your alarm goes off and your alarm doesn't care what cycle you're in. If you're in alpha waves or delta waves or theta waves, it doesn't really care. Mm-hmm. And so I think it really matters. If you come up out of a cycle of sleep naturally, you're more likely to remember than if you're interrupted in your cycle of sleep. So it makes more sense that you'd remember more dreams when you're allowed to rise up from sleep in a natural way, or when a dream actually just physically wakes you up. When it's so significant or so much, the dream is just so much, you just open your eyes and boom, there you are. And I've had a few of those too.
Yeah, I bet you have. If you have that many every night, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it takes me more than 8 hours to get 8 hours of rest. That's all I'm going to say about that.
So, Karen, what about folks who maybe have had a dream about people dying? Like, what can you tell us about dreaming of people dying?
Well, for the most part, they need not to worry because we dream that all the time. And just as in the tarot, the death card means an ending of a chapter. Usually in dreams, it means the same. That when we dream that someone dies, what we're sensing is an ending, and our subconscious attaches the word death to it. Our subconscious is not afraid of death the way that our conscious is. So there's no panic. I can remember it 15 years ago. My sister-in-law called me freaked out because she dreamed my husband died. I'm happy to report that right now he's sitting in the other room, alive and well, doing just fine. But, you know, usually you just need to ask yourself, is something ending or is something coming to a close around that person, a relationship or a chapter of a relationship? But I have had dreams that were a little more significant than that.
Have you actually had a dream that predicted someone's death?
I have, actually, but it wasn't what people would think. I didn't dream about a car accident or about someone, you know, seeing, was it in Harry Potter, the Grim? You know, I didn't see the Grim or something like that. I dreamed that I was in my uncle's house. My uncle was deceased, and he had spent his entire life as a person who repaired furnaces and air conditioning and stuff like that. So he always went to work in like a gray jumpsuit. You know what I'm talking about? Those kind of gray, but that repairmen wear. All my whole life, and he had died of lung cancer a few years before I had this dream. And I dreamed I was in his house, and he walked toward me across his kitchen, and he was wearing an Armani suit. And it struck me in the dream because I was like, wow, Uncle Clarence, man, you look fine. You know, I'm like, I never saw you at Armani. And I don't know how I knew it was Armani, but I knew it was. And he's smiling at me. And he kind of says to me, though I don't remember the exact words, you know, I am fine. And I'm like, what are you doing here? Like, and he's like, well, you're in my kitchen. I'm like, well, I know I'm in your kitchen, but what are you doing here? You know, I was kind of about half lucid, understanding that this was a relative of mine who was deceased. I knew that, but I hadn't quite grabbed on, I don't think, that I was communicating with a spirit of a loved one. Just curiosity was kind of overriding that dream. And he said, I'm just here to let you know that I'm here, which I thought was kind of, just like with my father, that was kind of aggravating. Like, what does that mean? What does that? So I woke up and I remember calling my mother and telling her about it. And she's like, well, that wasn't a visit because he would never in his whole life wear an Armani suit. There is no way he would wear that suit. You know, you just had a dream, a weird dream or whatever. And about 4 hours later, she called me on the phone, and another one of my uncles had been diagnosed with cancer that day. And she said, I want you to tell me about the dream again. And so it was my mother who first understood that maybe his appearance in my dream had something to do with this other uncle, because they were the exact same relation to me, men married to my mother's sisters. And I came to understand that the Armani suit was my symbol of being fine, of being all right, of being in the gold, of being in the great place. If I recall correctly, this happened right after some kind of award show that I'd watched. So I associated that with winning, the Armani suit with winning the award. And so I put the suit on him. That was my symbol. He met me in my dream to tell me that something was coming. And yes, the uncle that was diagnosed died of that cancer in about the same amount of time that the uncle who came to me had died of his cancer. And so it wasn't a death dream, And the reason that I know it was a visit is because of what I said earlier. He came to let me know that the other side was on this, that my uncle who was diagnosed was not going to face this alone, and he wasn't going to cross over alone. So it was meant to be a comfort, not a nightmare. And that has kind of been my rule of thumb ever since. That, if it just freaks you out, that might just be your own fears trying to talk to you. I just do not experience the other side as trying to scare us. I just don't.
So how many of your dreams do you feel are precognitive,
Well, I have some precognitive dreams that are different than visits. And I'll tell you about one in just a second. But probably if I dream 4 dreams a night, maybe 1 dream a week might be of real significance. So for the most part, like all the rest of the world, when I dream that I can't get my clothes to fit in a suitcase, I figure that dream means I have more work than I can get done. Like everybody else. I'm just having those same kind of dreams that everybody has, and that my subconscious is just trying to tell me what's going on in my life. I try to pay attention if I get angry in my dreams and yell at people, because then I figure I have anger issues that I need to go ahead and resolve in my waking dream. My waking self, it's like if you're really mad at that person, you need to deal with it. So, but I had this one dream. My children were quite a bit younger and of the age when you knew my middle son, when you had him as a student. And I dreamed that I was in downtown St. Charles at the Capitol building. And I know you've been there. The first Capitol of Missouri building is there. I was up on the top floor of that building, but in my dream, it was the 3rd floor. It's the 2nd floor in reality, but in my dream, it was the 3rd floor. And if any of you are avid dreamers, you understand that in dreams, architecture means very little. You create the architecture you want. So I was up there and I was very distressed. I had my 3 sons with me and I was strapping them to columns or posts in the building with belts. I was strapping them onto the posts, and I was explaining to them that I could not hang on to all 3 of them, that they were going to have to be strong and hold on to the posts themselves. In this dream, I was quite not afraid. Afraid is the wrong word. I was urgent. There was urgency in the dream. I knew that the time was short and that there were things that had to be done and things I had to do. And I knew that people had to get up to the 3rd floor of this building or they weren't going to survive. So I strapped my children to a column and I went off to the stairwell and began to scream at people to come up the stairs as quickly as they could. And I began to scream at the top of my lungs in this dream for people to hurry, and they wouldn't hurry. They kept walking up the stairs as if they were, I don't know, going to choir class. And they just weren't in a hurry, and it upset me a great deal, and I began to yell, and I got more and more distressed, and I got louder and louder and louder. And then I ran back to my children, and I explained to my oldest, I'm going to stay here with your 2 younger brothers. I need you to hold on to this post as if your very life depended on it. I am not strong enough to hold all three of you. And then behind me, I heard the sound of water, not like a lovely fountain of water, but like the sound of mountains of rushing water. And I remember screaming at the top of my lungs in the dream for the people to come up the stairs or die. And then I woke up. And I was quite distressed about this dream. I did not think it meant the death of my children because, as I said, I'd already kind of figured out that's not how it worked. But I didn't know what it meant. And because it upset me so much, I told several people about it. About 2 months later, I was standing in my bedroom and I was listening to a news report when I heard that sound of water behind me and recognized it from the dream. And when I turned around, it was a report on the tsunami that hit Indonesia and Thailand. And the actual report that I saw was of the beach in Thailand where the people who'd made it to the third floor had lived, but the people who were on the first and second floors had died. They had drowned. And stories of people, there were actual people on there talking about trying to hold on to their children and how they couldn't hold on to them. And I just cried. I just sat on my bed and cried about that because I had this almost memory of that from that precognition. It was just so strong, it was almost a memory. But I didn't really understand what it meant until after it was over.
Well, and so powerful that I could sit here and cry just listening to you,
Yeah.
even right as you got into talking about the beginning, just tying them to the columns. And now I feel kind of bad because earlier I was going to tell you that a lot of my dreams, my dog will make an appearance, and most of the time it's a dream about me being concerned for his safety or, being anxious or trying to protect him.
Yes.
And I'm like, well, gosh, that must be the same thing, except, I don't have kids. But I mean, that has to be, that's, I can't imagine waking up to that and having to interpret that.
Well, the symbols, if you think about the symbols for a minute, the thing that I love the most is at risk. And I understood even after having the dream that it wasn't my actual children that were at risk. I understood that. I had a psychic explain to me and work with me early on in some of my dream interpretation work that when you start screaming like that, when you yell at the top of your lungs in a dream and no one hears you, that what you're doing is trying to warn of a precognitive event. People really can't hear you, and you really are trying to warn them, but they can't hear you. And that's a symbol that your subconscious knows that you're seeing something coming, but you can't. But that you can't get the warning out because you can't find the details. I was aware of that. It was still very distressing and disturbing nonetheless. And over the years, I've wondered, because I dreamed the Joplin tornado. I dreamed, remember the Russian school that was bombed? I dreamed about that. And I've started telling people about my dreams. The Malaysian airline that went down. I believe Angela Thomas has been on your podcast.
Uh-huh.
I remember calling and telling her that I dreamed that I was climbing up a ladder to a thatch hut and saw a plane go over that looked like it had a bird on its tail. And the plane was going down and there was smoke billowing out of the back. And it wasn't until that airliner disappeared that I realized that the thatch hut was my symbol for Malaysia. Prejudice as it might be, that I still, when I think of Malaysia, I think of, the thatch huts on the beaches and the tropical dancers and things like that. That was my symbol for Malaysia. And when I looked up Malaysian Airlines, that symbol, the bird, was what I'd seen on the tail of the plane. And so ever since that's happened, I've been confident that plane went down in some kind of explosion or smoke. I have don't even ask me. I have no idea where it is. No judgment of that. But even Angela at the time was like, you're telling yourself what you know. She helped me unpack those symbols. But rather than being able to interpret the future, what those dreams do for me is they give me a sense of validation that when I have a dream that I'm clear is a message for me, I trust it and I believe it. Because these other dreams have happened and they've proven themselves to be accurate, then I give myself permission to believe the ones that are clear. So if I were to have a dream that my grandmother appeared and said, don't get on this airplane, I wouldn't. I've never had that kind of a dream. Most of them are much broader than that. But I would trust it if it happened. Because, because it's been proven to me that it's a valid form of communication. And I believe it's not just to me, because I am not a medium. I do not communicate with the dead, and I certainly don't do it for other people. But yet, my intuitive self still finds a way to hear the messages from the other side.
Well, I can tell the listeners that I've definitely had some weirdo dreams, and you've been there to jump in and kind of help me unpack them. So why don't you go into, what do you have going on in the future? And then where can people find you if they have a question for you, if they want to just find more things, Karen Burton?
Well, I have a site called gatewayintuitive.com, and that's where my intuitive services are, including my tarot readings and intuitive mentoring, which is kind of an umbrella for when I meet with people and do everything from reading their cards or helping them interpret their dreams or just seeing if I get any intuitive hits about what's going on in their life. It's what I call what's evolved over the years when I work with people, and that website, you can find me there and contact me through that. I'm also writing a book right now called Words Are Magic, and it's about the power of language, the language that comes to us from our culture and the language that we speak. And for those of you who are into the science of manifestation and intention, it yields itself kind of to that vein of thinking. And my writing website is called wordsaremagic.com, WORDSRMAGIC. Or if you just Google Karen W. Burton, it will send you there also. And that's where the updates on my book and my blog, where I talk about everything from my dog, whom I love like it was my child, Patrick. So do not dismiss loving your dog like a child. We love whom we love,
Thank you.
And the symbol means the same. It means exactly the same. The broader sense of me, you can find me there.
Well, cool. This has been such a lovely conversation, and you rock. Thank you for being here with us.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I love to talk about dreams, so I know what's going to happen now. All these people that I know who are going to listen to your podcast and they're going to say, oh, by the way, I dreamed about pancakes. What does that mean?
Well, we should definitely, I definitely want to encourage listeners then to either shoot Karen a message or comment on the blog or on the Facebook page or, and Karen I'll send those to Karen, or Karen will see them. And so why don't you kind of give us a message, give us your dreams. That would be cool.
That would be lovely.
Well, thank you. You rock. I already said that, didn't I?
You did.
Rock again.
Thank you.
For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit bigseance.com, now the home of both the blog and the podcast. Just click on the Big Seance Podcast logo or find it in the menu. You can also find and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher. Do you have any comments or feedback? Please contact me at patrick@bigseance.com. You can call my feedback line at 7755-TELL-ME. That's 775-583-5563. You can also record audio feedback right from the site using the SpeakPipe link included in the show notes. I could decide to include your voice in a future show. Thank you so much for listening and reading. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time.